Hi, everybody, and welcome to the John Myer podcast. Today, we're talking about deploy your Mac in the cloud. Yes, I said deploy your Mac in the cloud. And joining us today is Sebastien Stormacq, who is a principal developer advocate at AWS. Before we bring Sebastien onto the show, how about a little bit of information about Seb? Well, Seb has been writing code since he first touched a Commodore 64 in the mid-'80s. Yes, right around that time where I started playing with mine. He's inspiring builders to unlock the value of AWS Cloud and using his secret blend of passion, enthusiasm, customer advocacy, curiosity, and of course, creativity. His interest about software architectures, developing tools, and mobile commuting. How about we bring Seb onto the show? Seb, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me. And good morning, good afternoon to everybody.
All right, so Seb, where are you located? Where are you based out of?
You might have noticed a slight touch of French accent when I'm speaking. So I'm a native French speaker, but I'm not French. I'm from Belgium, and I'm located close to Paris, actually, right now, sunny north of France.
Nope, I didn't notice an accent at all. Sounds pretty plain.
Kind.
So Seb, you know what? You and I have kind of known each other for quite a while. When I was at AWS. Yeah. So, and all your content that you're sharing, and I've been trying to get you on the show, and it just hasn't worked out with our schedules. Finally, I just tagged you on Twitter. And I was like, yo, we've got to do this.
We have to do it now.
Yep. And here we are. And today we're talking about deploying your Mac in the cloud, on the cloud, somewhere around the cloud. I'm not sure. Sebastien,
in the cloud.
What is it all? How about before we get to that, you give the audience a little bit of information about yourself, more than what I read, but you know, who is Sebastien?
Yeah, what you read is my official bio on my website and the one we publish on the AWS News blog site as well. I'm a tech geek with, oh my God, almost 30 years of professional experience. That's why I have some white hairs as well, and my white hairs there. I work as a pre-sales engineer in the end of the 90s and beginning 2000 around the Java platform at the time where it was a big deal to choose a Java application server. We make studies for customer to help them choose a Java application server, if you even remember what is a Java application server. And I had different positions at Sun Microsystems, at IBM, and then I landed in the AWS training and certification team for 3 or 4 years. I deliver technical trainings to AWS customers. So I was traveling the world, mostly in Europe, but literally everywhere to teach architect, DevOps, and this type of 3 days class in person. Then I moved as a solution architect to the Alexa team, and I help customers to develop application for Alexa when we launch Alexa in Europe, in Italy, in Spain, in Germany, in UK, and in France. And then I moved back to AWS as a developer advocate. So I try to convince developer to prefer the AWS technologies versus something else. I refer to my job as planting seeds for the long term, to show the possible, to inspire people so that they know it exists. Maybe they are not going to use it now, but at least the solutions I want to present should be part of the tool bag of any tech enthusiast or cloud enthusiast. That's a good definition for you.
That was actually pretty good. You plant the seeds, and I think that's really valuable and key in a lot of the conversations, because when you read a blog post or you see something online, you see possibilities that are able to achieve, right? You might not be doing it now, but what it does is it says, oh, listen, I saw somebody do this online. It was pretty cool. What if I could do X, Y, and Z on top of what they did? And now you're enabling them to, kind of do more, not only in the cloud, but see what is possible.
Exactly. And it's a two-way avenue of conversation as well, because I'm in touch with a lot of developers from different backgrounds, and not only AWS customer, also in third-party communities or technological communities that are not affiliated with AWS. So it's also a way to get in touch with reality and bring feedback to the service team. Typical feedback is about documentation or getting started. It's too complicated. There are too many choices. So we help to provide the right message to developers, to give them the right tools to get started, how to choose which service to use, how to get started if you are not an AWS expert.
This seems like a good time to jump in and talk about today's sponsor, Veeam. How would you like to own, control, and protect your data in any cloud, anywhere, including AWS? Veeam Backup for AWS is a native solution to protect all of your AWS data. It's fully automated, set it, forget it within one platform, centrally managed. Veeam Backup for AWS is a robust solution from snapshots, replication, full recovery within AWS, granular file recovery, and including recover outside of AWS. Implement Veeam Backup for AWS today before you find out that your current solution isn't working. Now, how about we get you back to that podcast? So speaking of having too many tools to kind of get started, AWS released another one. What has it been, about a year, 2 years already, of Mac in the cloud. And speaking of that, Seb's actually going to be talking to us today about deploying your Mac in the cloud. And we have a demo, so stick around. Seb, what does it mean to deploy your Mac in the cloud?
Yeah, many customers are using Mac Minis for their CI/CD farm. You know, these type of banks, for example, or companies that are providing a mobile application. There are tons of companies that are building iOS application right now. And to build an application for some phase of the build, you need to do that on Mac. Of course, the developer can write code on Linux or Windows, but if you really want to assemble end-to-end your application and sign it for distribution on the App Store, that process is officially supported on macOS only. I'm not saying it's not possible to do it somewhere else, but it's officially supported on Mac only. And I'm talking with customers since 2 or 3 years about the macOS usage on premises, and it's surprising to see how many customers have a couple of Mac Minis in the closet or under a desk. And it's like shadow IT sometimes. The IT department is not even aware that these Macs exist, and they have all the problems that I think we solve since many years for Linux and Windows Server. They have to provision that manually. They have to connect it to the network to maintain it in operational condition, to update software, Mac OS, Xcode, the development environment from Apple. So it takes a lot of time, and it's very difficult to automate that. It's possible, but it's not super well documented. Many are not automating that. So many customers are actually having a couple of people dedicated to maintain this pool of Mac Mini. So the idea is, what if we can bring all the things that AWS customer knows and love about EC2 since the last 17 years or something, but bring that to macOS. So an API to start a machine, stop a machine, to create a disk image, to create a snapshot, to create security groups. That would help customers a lot. And that's what we did with EC2 Mac instance. You're right. It's roughly 2 years and a half ago that we launched the first one, x86 Max Mini. And now it's the second generation is there. We have, I was about to say Graviton. That's our brand. Apple Silicon, so ARM machine from Apple. I'm talking a lot, sorry. So interrupt me if you want to go into some details.
No, Seb, you can talk as much as you like. This is all about you and deploying, Mac on the cloud. I'll give you a little bit of information. I actually built an app for the App Store. This was back, I won't date myself. Was it 10 years? Maybe some. Yeah, actually, I think it was about 10 years ago. I worked for a beverage company, and what I wanted to do is we had a very simple mathematic program that allowed you to punch a code in. It would give you a code back. This code was proprietary, meaning that it allowed you to do something on another device rather than calling the office. So every iPhone would have it, or every user or admin would have it. We would give you a code, you punch it in, and you're like, oh, now I can authorize this. I never made it to the official app store. I got to it and they're like, well, what is this? And I was like, it's more business use than end user type use. But I had it on my phone, and it actually worked out great because I never had to be around a laptop. I remember going through the entire process of installing the SDK, the developer kit, going through everything just to get this to work. It probably took me almost, 3 or 4 weeks. You had to, obviously pay for the developer community, go through all the entire process. It was worth it for me to learn it. And now I can say I actually built one. It's no longer on my phone because it's not supported. But either way, I thought it was pretty cool. And when, AWS released this, I remember seeing the picture of them wheeling off all these Mac Minis from the truck. I thought it was pretty cool just to see this entire, I'll never be able to see all these in one place again. But I love it that AWS has released this, has made it available for everybody, and develop a number of apps within AWS. Hey, this looks like a good place to jump in and talk about today's sponsor, Veeam. How would you like to own, control, and protect your data in the cloud? Are you using Salesforce? Veeam has you covered with Veeam Backup for Salesforce, backing up your Salesforce data effortlessly, whether it's on-premise or in the cloud. Honestly, why wouldn't you back up your most critical CRM data from loss or corruption? Now imagine your sales team coming in and not be able to recover all their information, their notes, their pipeline, because it's the one thing you didn't think you needed to back up. How about doing it effortlessly with Veeam Backup for Salesforce? While there are 9 reasons that you should back up your Salesforce data, how about just 2, data loss and data corruption? Veeam Backup for Salesforce eliminates the risk of you losing your data and metadata due to human error, integration, or other Salesforce data loss scenarios. Check out Veeam Backup for Salesforce today. Now, how about we get you back to that podcast?
There is a lot of innovation going into that, because if you think about it, we give access to the Mac Mini to a VPC, a private network, to security groups, to IAM policies. So, as I said, all the things customers are used to find on EC2, they find the same on Mac OS. And the magic, no, it's not magic, it's engineering, but the piece of engineering that allows to do that is Nitro. Nitro is the virtualization system from EC2. So it's a mix of software and hardware that allows us to create the EC2 instances. And so the Mac Mini, it's really a Mac Mini, a standard part from Apple. There is absolutely nothing different or special for AWS. It's standard ones that we bought from Apple. And we connect them through an external port through the Nitro card. So in the rack, in the 1U chassis of the rack, you have the Mac Mini connected with a bunch of cable to the Nitro card. And the Nitro card is what is connected to the rest of the network. So that's what's give access to EBS, for example, to give the Mac a volume to boot, and that allows you to create snapshot and AMI, the security groups, the VPC, all the virtualization. I was again going to say magic, but it's not magic, it's just engineering, happens at Nitro level. They even develop a robotic finger, because sometimes you need to power off the machine and to power on, and so there is a little mechanical finger that push the button on and off whenever we need to turn off the machine.
Are you
once
serious?
You have access to the machine. Yeah, I'm serious.
Oh my God, I want to see this. That's pretty cool. I mean, you don't need, I remember going into data centers and pressing that power button and, hey, can you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go power off this server?
We cannot do that at the scale at which we operate. Everything has to be automated. So yes, as you said, we have a lot. I'm not going to give a number. I don't know the number, but a lot of these machines that customer can acquire on demand. That's, I think, is unique on the market. You don't need to call us beforehand, or you just go to the console just like you do. It has to go through dedicated host. That's a bit different from Linux and Windows, and that's a requirement from the macOS license term. If you own a Mac and you let someone else use it, it has to be the entire machine and not a virtual machine on that machine. So the step is to reserve a dedicated host, and then you start and stop the instance, which is actually a full bare metal machine. So you have full performance. There is no overhead provided by virtualization.
The engineering that goes behind it. Now, I can understand a dedicated host, because here's what I was thinking. I was like, okay, EC2 instance, I can spin up as many as I want wherever I want, but how do they know I want a Mac here or Mac here? How do I allocate so many Macs? And walking through and kind of visualizing that these are attached to the Nitro cards, they're actually on a dedicated host. I envision seeing these Mac Minis like racked in or have a special hook to the dedicated host behind each one. Is it one Mac Mini per dedicated host, or can I have multiple Mac Minis or Mac? We'll just say, we won't say Mac Minis, Mac OSs per dedicated host, or can I have multiple?
Yeah, right now it's Mac Mini, so we can say Mac Mini. Maybe in the future we'll have other types as well, but right now it's Mac Mini. It's a dedicated host is a full Mac Mini that you reserve for your own usage. So you are the sole exclusive user of that Mac Mini during the time during the time to which the dedicated host is attached to your account. As soon as you release the dedicated host, of course, it's going to be cleaned up, scrubbed, and put back in the available pool for another customer to grab it.
Seb, let me ask you that what was the whole idea behind creating a Mac option for AWS customers? And I already kind of know the answer, thinking customer obsession and the request for it, but isn't it easier for them to just do it on their own or have this dedicated in-house?
There are two main use cases from our customer. The one I mentioned at the beginning is CI/CD, so to create a farm of machine for the build and test and signature job. Another one is to give access remotely to a development machine. Some companies are using workers that are overseas, and it's sometimes easier to prepare a machine in cloud and give them access to that machine rather than ship physically a Mac. But in both cases, it goes to the core of the cloud messaging or the EC2 messaging, having on-demand access to resource that you can programmatically configure. So it's much easier for a Mac system admin to use the EC2 API to create an instance, create a golden AMI, restart as many instances as needed. If something goes wrong, you just terminate the instance, you spawn a new one. All of that can be automated. And so it's time that is free up from managing on-premises machine, and time that you can use to do something with a bit higher value in the chain and focus on your application and on the things that make your application really different from competition, rather than doing, the undifferentiated heavy lifting like Werner like to call it.
Everybody, we're talking with Seb Stormacq, a principal developer advocate at AWS, around the topic of deploying your Mac in the cloud. And our whole conversation is AWS created a AWS image, or basically a Mac Mini, to a dedicated host for you to deploy Mac OSs. And it's not just a laptop or a workstation. Think of it from an application or building apps, a global access device to build it for your workforce. Seb, why put applications on? Originally, when this came out, I was like, oh man, I can have a Mac OS on AWS and I can go in there and, now I'm able to access it. But that's kind of a little costly to have my, a virtual workstation on an EC2 instance. Why application?
That's true. That's the use case is not a replacement of the laptop on your desk, unless there are very specific requirements, as I mentioned, like overseas worker that need to have access to dedicated environment or very specific environment. But you should look at it as the whole cost of management of this machine. As I said, it's everything that you know and love from EC2 that you can apply to macOS. So if you zoom out, it's not just having access to a Mac Mini. You have access to a Nitro card. It doesn't ring a bell like that, but it means it can be integrated with your private resource on your private networks, get access to private APIs that are accessed during the build. It fits within enterprise procurement, billing, and InfoSec process for customers that are already AWS customer. They know how to procure resource, to acquire more resource. The billing channel is already in place. And more importantly, the security, the channel, the compliance, the verification. It's an EC2 instance. So it emits CloudWatch. It can be monitored through the typical monitoring solution that customers are using on AWS. So, all the framework that an InfoSec team has put in place, now it fits also for macOS, where before that, if you have a macOS or Mac Mini in the closet, it's like a separate world. How do you ensure that the Mac Mini in the closet is compliant with your latest security guidelines? You cannot. Once it is an EC2 instance, you can.
Oh, right. There's the value. I mean, you're already experienced in deploying out AWS, whether it's through like a CI/CD, you're utilizing, IAM policies, VPN, security groups. You're getting everything integrated from Nitro, and it's just an EC2 instance with a different OS available to it. All the engineering behind this for it to work is mind-blowing, right? You think somebody just took it, they plugged it in and said, hey, it's all going to work on a thing, but there was a lot of thoughts going into it to make this integrated with AWS services. Seb, let's talk about iOS and deployment and kind of the process behind it, building apps. I mean, the use cases are endless, having a Mac available to you globally for all your teams.
Yeah, building an application on iOS is something super easy to do with a graphical user interface. Xcode is the Apple development tool, and most Apple developers know how to use Xcode, and Xcode is doing a lot of things behind the scene for you. When you use an EC2 Mac instance, by default, there is no graphical user interface, and I don't recommend to start one. It's possible. You can have a graphical user interface and click just like you do for Windows with RDP, for example. There is the same for macOS. But if you think about automation and scalability, what really gives the value of the cloud, the machine should be able to boot and start to be useful automatically, and you should not interact with that machine beyond the initial configuration. So everything has to be done through a command line, either through SSH or SSM system. What is SSM? Security System Manager. I always forgot the acronym, but SSM
Yeah.
Connect. It's the AWS way to connect to a remote machine, Linux or macOS, through an agent which is installed into the operating system. And when you start to build, assemble, and sign an iOS application without a graphical user interface, you realize that you need to massage the machine a bit, prepare the machine a bit to make it work. And that process is not documented. So I spent a lot of my time last year to try to document that. I have a series of blogs that is going to be published hopefully in the coming weeks, and videos as well that explain how to prepare a cloud machine for CI/CD. And I developed a demo with GitLab, GitHub, and Circle CI. So I use different CI/CD provider to show how you can use an EC2 Mac instance to integrate it inside your CI/CD pipelines.
We have a demo that's coming up in just a few minutes. Seb's actually going to walk us through some of the use cases, some of the things that he's actually done with the EC2 instance, Mac OS. He has his phone hooked up. He has this all integrated. Give us just a few moments. We're going to do that. Seb, before I let you do the demo, are there any limitations that you should be aware of utilizing the Mac OS?
There is one. It's not a technical one. It's again, it's a licensing one. When you reserve a dedicated host, a Mac Mini dedicated host, it's for minimum 24 hours. So you cannot release the dedicated host before 24 hours. And once again, it's something coming from the macOS user license agreement. So it means that you acquire a host, it's for you for at least 24 hours. You can start an instance, stop an instance. The billing is associated to the dedicated instance reservation, not to the EC2 instance. So just like that's how dedicated instance works even before macOS. The only thing different with Mac is that block of time. After that block of time, you can release, of course, at any time, and you're billed by the second after the initial 24 hours. That's the only technical limitation. Oh, it's not technical, sorry. Licensing limitation. Beside that, I don't think about any technical limitation. It's really behaving like an EC2 instance. So the API that you are used to use for EC2 instance applies to macOS as well. You can SSH to it, and once you're on the Mac, it's a standard Mac. If you want to start a graphical user interface, you can. Yeah, it's a standard macOS. There is really nothing special about AWS on macOS itself.
Okay, so the licensing limitation is 24 hours. My assumption is that when you first acquire this, you go in and you build out exactly how you want this to look, right? Your image, you build an image from it. So when you want to provision it again, you already have it up and running and you don't have to redo everything, because it's going to take you longer than 24 hours to get the initial setup, correct?
At the initial setup, yes. If you are not used to configure a Mac from a command line, it might take a bit more than 24 hours the very first time to get it right. Some customers are using a combination of Terraform and Packer script to build a golden image. Golden image is the one they are going to use to start other instance. So what they put in their golden image, typically it's their build tool chain, whatever libraries and tools they need to build their software, maybe their custom management agent, just to be sure that this instance is part of the global fleet for InfoSec again to keep an eye on the machine. And typically they are going to have multiple golden image because in large iOS development shop, they want to build for the latest version of iOS, but also for the previous one, and most of the time for the next one, the next beta one, to ensure that the application continue to work on beta. And so these require different version of Xcode to be installed. So what typically customers are doing, they are maintaining multiple gold image, and each gold image is a combination of macOS version plus Xcode version. So they might have 4, 5, 6, 10, depending on how many of these combinations they want to maintain. They automate the creation of these golden image with Terraform, might be CloudFormation as well, and a Packer. And then they create pool of CI/CD machines for a specific macOS version and iOS version. Meaning that whenever a developer wants to test a build on a specific combination of macOS and iOS version, they can select a specific pool to start from. Airbnb is an example of such customer. They release a blog post explaining exactly what I just explained with all the details of their Terraform and Packer script. It's quite fascinating read, and it's in the notes of the podcast. I'll share the link with you, John.
Wow, Seb, you're a true pro, because I was actually going to ask you for the blog post and the link to it. And I was going to ask you, can you group a bunch of these servers and Mac OSs together? You already indicated that you can put these into a pool, distribute them to a pool of the environment. And that's what allows, obviously, you have a dedicated host for each Mac Mini or Mac instance. For it. The only thing I'm going to leave with the audience is be cognizant of cost optimization. If you're going to deploy this out on a Friday, my suggestion is to wait to the following week, because you're not going to use it for the 24 hours that's happening unless you have a team right around the cycle for it. Seb, let's get to this demo. Oh,
one
no,
more
go ahead.
Thing. One more thing before the demo: saving plans apply. So if you have a compute saving plans, saving plans
nice.
is a way to buy capacity ahead of time. If you have a compute saving plan, it applies to EC2 macOS as well, and you can get up to 44% cost reduction compared to the on-demand price.
Oh, that's a good cost savings for me. I didn't know that savings plans apply actually to the Mac OS itself. Is it to the Mac OS, or is it just to the dedicated host and the number of OS?
Dedicated host.
I gotcha. Well, that's why it applies. Well, that's always another cost savings tips. Okay, now we got 2 in this one. Seb, let's get to that demo. What are you showing us?
A CI/CD pipeline for an iOS application. So I have a very simple iOS application, something I wrote myself, so it's not super fancy. Use the different groups of backend services group behind Amplify. It's a library that makes it easy for a mobile application developer to access cloud-based services. So the application uses a GraphQL API, S3 for image storage, and Cognito for user authentication. And I took an EC2 Mac instance. I installed Xcode on it. I installed the GitLab agent on it, and I hook it up to GitLab. So the flow is basically starting from the developer push a commit to GitLab, GitLab inform the agent running on EC2 Mac that there is a new version of the source code available, and that agent will run the full pipeline until the end. So it will also push the application binary to App Store Connect and to an application from Apple called TestFlight. TestFlight, it's an Apple application that allows a developer to distribute binary version of your application to your beta tester, to the people that will test the application before it's available on the App Store. And it's fully automated, so you have nothing to do. It goes from the GitLab push to the application being downloaded on the phone automatically, and that's what I would like to show today. Is it clear? Any question before I dive into the details?
Nope, let's do this.
Okay, so the whole thing takes roughly 7-8 minutes on this setup. I have here my demo application. It's like a memory keeping tracking application where you can take picture of a specific memory on a specific day and associate a note. And you see the application on the right side on the screen. It's running in the simulator of Xcode, the Canva of Xcode. And you see that there is picture, there is text, but there is also something like a gray background around the picture, which is not so nice. So many customers say, hey, can we remove that? And as a developer, I'm always listening to my customers. So I say, yes, of course, I'm going to remove the gray background. So I go to the source code, I locate the line responsible for that gray background, and you see in the simulator the change is valid. Now I have a white background for my test. It's for my application. So I want to push that code change through my pipeline to have actually the updated application here on my phone. So you cannot see the screen of my phone, but if I do this, you see that I have the same application running on my phone with the gray background. So that's the bad version, the one I want to update. Oops, and I have someone trying to call me just when I show you the screen.
That's
it's actually an
like
Amazon delivery.
Perfect. That's actually like perfect timing. That typically happens, right? You have everything silenced, whatever it is. Here's my demo. The one time somebody could call or should call, they call.
I receive one phone call per week, and it's right now. So let's push my change to my GitLab repository. So from Xcode, source control, commit, I put a commit message here, remove gray background. Please always put a commit message to your commit.
What? Can't I just say updating?
That's something I learned from my grandma, and I'm trying
for my
to apply.
stuff, I'll probably put like message, updating, updating.
And I push that to GitLab main. Oops. So it should go directly to GitLab. So switching to the GitLab website, that's my repository on GitLab. You see the repository and the source code is here. And you see that I just author a change right now, just now. So on this repository, I also have a CI/CD pipeline configured. And for each commit, the pipeline will run on the EC2 Mac instance running in the cloud. And you see here, I have removed gray background commit, which is there, and a pipeline, which is currently running. So the pipeline has multiple tests, stage, the pre-build, the build, the test, the deploy, and the post-build. We are going to see each of these steps in details. It takes 7 to 8 minutes roughly to finish. So while it's compiling and testing and everything, let's go into a bit of the details of what is this actually doing. So it starts from the developer on the top left side. That was me changing the source code, committing, and pushing the change to GitLab. In the cloud, I have an EC2 Mac instance. And the EC2 Mac instance has the GitLab agent installed. So the GitLab agent is pulling GitLab to wait for change. And when there is a change in the source code, it starts to execute a pipeline. So a pipeline, it's a set of different steps. And the first step for me is to prepare Amplify. That's very specific to Amplify application. I need to pull the cloud configuration. Where is my endpoint for the API? What bucket should I use? What is the cognito pool I should use? So that's a one line on the command line just to pull the configuration from Amplify. The next thing that the script does to prepare the machine is to prepare the keychain. The keychain is a secure database on macOS that is used to keep your password. If you are using a Mac laptop, this is where Safari, for example, is keeping your web password. But this is also where we put the key and the certificates that allows to sign the application. Remember, if you want to distribute an application on the App Store, you need to prove that it's you, the author of the app. And so you need to have a certificate and a signing key that you can buy from Apple. So preparing the keychain means getting the secret somewhere, and we are on AWS. So I'm using Secrets Manager, but you can use other source of secrets as well. Parameter Store might be one of them. So I'm using Secret Manager to retrieve the certificate and the key that I received from Apple and put that in the keychain so that later when my build process will need the key and the certificate, it will find it in the keychain. And earlier in this show, I was talking about the things that Xcode does for you behind the scene that you don't even realize. That's one of the things it does. But here, I'm not using Xcode, at least not the graphical user interface of Xcode. So I need to process all the steps that Xcode graphical user interface is doing for me automatically. The rest is pretty straightforward. It's a build. There is one command line to do that. Xcode build. It will build your project and generate a binary. The next step is testing, and there are two different types of tests you can do. You can run your unit test, or you can run a full graphical user interface test with a script that simulates click and user interaction. You can do both on EC2 Mac. You can run the unit test in a simulator and the graphical user interface test in a simulator as well. Most of the time, you want to test on actual device as well. So I include into the demo something called Device Farm. Device Farm is an AWS service with real actual device, Android, iPhone, and web browsers as well, where you can send your graphical user interface test script, and these will be executed on real physical device. And then as a developer, you download the logs of the test and the result of the test to know if the test succeed or not. That part I skipped for the demo. I'm not sending the real testing script to a real physical device because it takes like 20-25 minutes to complete the test, and that's too long for this type of demo. And then the last step is to deploy. So I'm using the command line provided by Apple to actually upload my binary to Apple Test Flight. Apple Test Flight will verify the binary, and once the binary is okay, it will distribute the binary automatically to all registered Test Flight user. So something you cannot see here on my phone is that I have the Test Flight application installed. I have two application there. My getting started, the little yellow triangle, and I have Shime because I'm one of the beta tester of the mobile Shime application as well. So this is the app that Apple will use to actually push the new version of my app. So I explained all that, and you see that by the time I explain everything happens there. I'm on the GitLab pipeline. I can follow the log, and I can see that, hey, the cleanup has been done and everything has been done. So if I switch to App Store Connect, which is the website that Apple used to manage your application on the App Store, and I reload this page, I should see, yes, there is one additional build. It's in gray right now, and it says processing. So that's the build that it just received from my EC2 Mac instance that upload that build. So how long it takes to process that on the Apple website, I think it depends on their queue, because sometimes it's like 1 minute, sometimes it might be 10 minutes, but whenever they will finish processing, they will push it to a Test Flight, and all registered user on their phone for that app on Test Flight will automatically receive the build. So the build will be downloaded and will be available in my app to test. Any questions so far, John, while we are waiting for Apple to process that binary?
Yeah, Seb, so some clarification. Once Apple does its processing, you said it's going to be pushed down all to the devices. I see you have your phone connected to your laptop, but that's only for this, like for you to actually connect the phone to the demo portion here. It's going to push it down wirelessly to all devices, or do you have to enable or allow something to happen?
No, actually the cable was because I was trying to show you the screen of my phone on the screen for the demo, but I don't need the cable. So it will be pushed by using the Wi-Fi from the phone.
Okay. Once that happens, it'll automatically be updated. We can show everybody, the changes that were made. And like Seb indicated, it does take about, 8 to 10 minutes, depending on how quick Apple goes. This is not a limitation on AWS, correct? You're just using...
the AWS part is finished now. The build is done. The build is signed. It has been sent to Apple for processing. And the time it takes to process really vary from one demo to the other.
I remember Test Flight. I can't believe that's still around. I use that for my application and how I built it. So it's nice to know that that actually hasn't changed. Except for somebody to get started, why this is building, right? Say, man, I love this podcast. Seb, how do I get started? How do I start? I want to start building an application. Should they test it out locally? Or do you think it's efficient for enterprises to do it utilizing AWS? What are the scale of use cases from beginners to enterprises?
You talk about the CI/CD pipeline itself?
Well, actually just getting started building out applications.
Yeah, getting started building iOS application first, it's really fun because it's a graphical application and you can change your code and see directly in Xcode how it behaves. So if I go back to my Xcode here, this little canvas, as they call it, it's extremely reactive. And you can really assemble your user interface and see it working as you type, almost as you type. There are tons of resources. The best one are on the Apple website, of course, developer.apple.com, to get started with the Swift programming language if you don't know Swift, and then with iOS, macOS, iPadOS development. One of the rewarding things as well is that when you develop for iOS, everything you learn is applicable to iPadOS, watchOS, tvOS. So you have the whole Apple ecosystem there where you can distribute your application. The thing I show specifically on the build automation, it's not for beginners. It's more for either you have already an app live on the App Store and you don't want to manually build, assemble, test, sign your application and manage your build to App Store Connect manually, and you want to automate that. And of course, for enterprise, if you have more than one iOS developer, at some point you will find benefits of automating your build and having a dedicated machine in the cloud or somewhere else, but a machine that assemble your code as the developers are making changes to the code.
Nice. I think that's something as you want to grow and progress a little bit along where you want to automate the process. It's nice to kind of get started locally. You can build it on, your laptop, a Mac Mini that you have. But as you start to grow and you want to deploy out multiple of these, it's actually very efficient to kind of expand. And if you have other workers or helpers that want to kind of get in there and do the same thing, that'd be pretty awesome. Seb, it looks like it completed.
Yep, exactly. I was refreshing the page, and here, I don't know if you see, my phone is in Spanish. It's too long to explain, but you see the word actualizar update next to the getting started application. So It means that TestFlight knows that there is a new version available. So I can just click update in English, and it should download the application and install the application for me automatically. And again, it might take a few seconds, and here it's taking a bit longer than usual. So I still have.
Of course, during demo time, right? When we're trying to demo something out, that's usually when things take a little bit of time. In fact, we tried to hook up and get Seb's phone connected to do a screen share. It wasn't working, but it was working earlier. Oh, there we go.
I opened the app and you see the gray background is not there anymore. The small one-line change I did in Xcode has been pushed automatically to my phone. And of course, it only applies to a test flight. So for beta testing of the application, if you want to publish to the real App Store for your real user, there is an additional step of verification from Apple that might take from a few hours to a few days, depending on their queue and depending on the complexity on your application as well.
While this podcast isn't about the Apple QA process and getting an app on the store, it's about efficiently using the AWS Mac OS and creating a full-blown pipeline and farm available for all your application needs for the Mac App Store, while allowing you to grow. Seb, this has been awesome.
Thank you. I hope you learned something and that you learned something as well.
I learned a lot. In fact, it brought me back to when I built my application, and it kind of gets you itching to build another one. I took a couple of classes on it. I went into some live training. I was like, man, I really want to build an app. The entire process is great to know. Getting started, do it locally, grow and expand globally with AWS's services on a dedicated host. We talked about some cost optimization efforts, including that these are available for savings plans. Seb, as I wrap things up, what do you want to leave with everybody?
GitHub.com/Sebsto, SEBSTO, and you will find the URL in the notes of this episode as well. This is the repo with all the source code of the app itself, but that's not very important, but also all the shell script that allows you to automate all these different steps. So it's a good starting point if you want to automate your build process yourself on EC2 Mac or even on a Mac in the closet. It's the same shell script. It's just automation on Mac OS.
Everybody, I'm going to leave a link in the description below. Seb, this is awesome that you kind of provided this getting started steps for everybody. Let them play around with it, see what the possibilities are, and just grow from there.
Exactly. I have nothing. You summarize it perfectly well.
As a principal developer advocate, Seb usually has a lot to say, but on the other side of the things, so do I, and I hope I captured everything. Seb, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, and please leave your feedback, leave your comments. I will read them. I will reply them if a reply is necessary, but let us know what you think, how we can make that easier to consume or easier to use or to understand.
Awesome. Okay, everybody. Seb Stormacq, Principal Developer Advocate at AWS. Today's topic was deploying your Mac in the cloud. My name's John Myer. Thank you for watching the John Myer podcast. Don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and notify because guess what? We're out of here.